opioids, and the election. With less than 2 weeks until the midterm, we're in Arizona, looking at how the battle against drug-related deaths is factoring into a hotly contested Senate race. Synod on Youth, a preview of what the final document from the global gathering of bishops will include, and what young people are saying. Catholic in America, our continued coverage of our exclusive media analysis of the Catholic Church. And a feast day for gamers. Why a new app is being called a Catholic version of Pokemon. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, October 24th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. At least 5 explosive devices believed to be pipe bombs target prominent Democrats and a cable news network, and the president is calling for unity. The Secret Service intercepted a bomb addressed to Hillary Clinton in New York. A possible explosive was sent to the Obama residence in Washington, and a suspicious package caused CNN's New York bureau to be evacuated. The president condemned the act.
This egregious conduct is abhorrent to everything we hold dear and sacred as Americans.
Several other Democrats also received packages. All the confirmed bombs appeared to come from the same person or persons. There were no explosions and no reports of injuries. President Trump later turned his attention to the opioid crisis. He says it's time to end the scourge of drug addiction in America. Correspondent Mark Irons just left the East Room of the White House, where President Trump signed legislation to confront the epidemic. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The new law will provide more treatment options for patients and allow the U.S. Postal Service to scan packages for dangerous drugs. And across the country, Catholic Charities is doing its part in the battle against opioid addiction.
Together we will defeat this epidemic.
President Trump in the East Room of the White House signs bipartisan legislation to combat the opioid epidemic and touts his administration's accomplishments in the fight so far.
We have secured $6 billion in new funding to combat opioids, the most money ever received in history.
1 year ago, here in the same room, President Trump declared the opioid crisis a national health emergency. Numbers from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention count more than 70,000 people dead from drug overdoses last year. Opioids involved in 48,000 of those deaths. Preliminary data from the end of 2017 to the start of this year indicates a 7% slowdown in deaths.
We are going to end it, or we are going to at least make an extremely big dent in this terrible, terrible problem.
Catholic Charities serves on the front lines. The nonprofit offers outpatient addiction therapy programs throughout the U.S. I spoke with a representative in New Jersey.
For example, we provide treatment services to opioid-addicted pregnant women. We're also providing recovery housing and linkages to child care.
Over the past year, President Trump has promised to get tough on drug dealers.
And that toughness includes the death penalty.
He argues one dealer can peddle enough drugs to fill a cemetery.
Some of these drug dealers will kill thousands of people during their lifetime.
The Vatican recently updated the Catholic Catechism to say the death penalty is inadmissible because it goes against the dignity of the person. Still, the U.S. Justice Department issued a memo earlier this year encouraging prosecutors to consider capital punishment for certain drug-related crimes. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. And now to Arizona. The opioid epidemic there has reached catastrophic proportions. In June of 2017, it prompted the governor to declare a state of emergency. And that declaration, while it was terminated last May, has left scars of thousands of deaths and lives in ruin. And they are visible all over this battleground state. Correspondent Jason Calvi is in Arizona, where the opioid issue is front and center in a tight Senate race. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. What's happening in that building behind me could help determine the fate of the United States Senate. That's because here in Prescott, Arizona, and places across the state, they're early voting. Democratic candidate Kyrsten Sinema is a former social worker. She sponsored legislation to deal with the opioid crisis by cracking down on doctors who overprescribe it. Now, her opponent, Republican Martha McSally, a former Air Force fighter jet pilot, is also dealing with the opioid crisis, saying it's linked with border security and illegal immigration.
As your senator, I'll be a warrior against the cartels and the opioid epidemic.
McSally and May chaired a House field hearing in Phoenix on this topic. McSally criticized her opponent, fellow Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema, for leaving that hearing after only 30 minutes. Sinema later spoke on the House floor about the problem of opioids.
We are passing bills to help reduce foreign shipments of illegal synthetic opiates from places like China that enter our country through the mail system.
Sinema and McSally debated just once. Opioids were not brought up, but they were asked for their views on overturning Roe versus Wade. Sinema said the government should be kept out of that decision. McSally responded that she's pro-life. Now, Democrats have not held a Senate seat here in Arizona since 1995. Former governor of Arizona, Republican Jan Brewer, is endorsing McSally. But two major newspapers in the state, the Arizona Republic and the Arizona Daily Star, are both endorsing the Democrat, Sinema. Lauren?
What do we expect to see next on the campaign trail? I know both of them must be traveling the state extensively.
Extensive traveling, especially as you can tell people right now early voting in the state. And I have to stand right here 75 feet away legally, so that's why we can't give you a great view like we had last night of the mountains. But tonight, Martha McSally, the Republican, is going to be visiting a synagogue for a meet and greet. Then on Friday, Vice President Mike Pence will rally for her. That comes 1 week after President Trump rallied for McSally.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you for your great reporting. Pope Francis removes the head of the Diocese of Memphis, Tennessee. Bishop Martin Holley was investigated by the Vatican following major changes that he made in Memphis. Among them was the reassignment of up to 2/3 of 60 active priests in the diocese. Holley is a former auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., working under former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick and Cardinal Donald Wuerl. Archbishop Joseph Kurtz of Louisville will replace Holley temporarily. The caravan of Central American migrants has grown to more than 7,000 people, and the group is roughly 1,000 miles from its goal, the United States border. President Trump says to protect the boundary, he's considering a military option beyond the National Guard. Saudi Arabia's crown prince calls the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi a heinous crime, and those responsible for his death will not escape justice. The prince's comments are the first since a global outcry over the death of the Washington Post contributor. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee has more from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The U.S., the U.K., and France are just a few of the countries urging Saudi Arabia to reveal all they know about the death of Khashoggi. But the country putting the most pressure on the Saudis is Turkey. Reportedly, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman spoke to the Turkish president just before the prince made these remarks.
This was a very, very painful incident for all Saudis and also for everybody in this planet. It was unnecessary. Saudi Arabia will go and implement all necessary rules and investigate deeply in order to achieve results and to bring to justice those who were responsible for this heinous crime.
Prince Mohammed speaking at a global economic conference in Riyadh known as Davos in the Desert. The conference has been overshadowed by international outrage over Khashoggi's death. The 59-year-old journalist, who was a critic of the Saudi royal family, was killed October 2nd inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Many countries have chosen not to attend the summit until the investigations are over. Now, Prince Mohammed promised today Saudi-Turkish relations would not be hurt, but the Turkish president continues to say they will not allow journalist murder to be covered up. Now, back here, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been careful not to place blame on either the Crown Prince or anyone in particular until he says they have a clear picture of exactly what happened. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. A Japanese journalist freed after more than a year then 3 years of captivity in Syria, says he's safe in neighboring Turkey. Jumpei Yasuda was kidnapped in 2015 by al-Qaeda's branch in Syria. Qatar helped obtain the journalist's freedom along with Turkey and other countries in the region. A bishop from Cameroon says he is against including any reference to the so-called LGBT Catholics in the final document coming out on the Synod of Youth.
That if I go to my diocese with a document carrying LGBT and I announce to 1,000 youth that we now have pastoral care for LGBT, 99.9% will raise their hands and ask me, what's that?
And that's Bishop Andrew Nakia Fuanya. He is from Cameroon and says his churches are bursting with young people. The Synod participants will vote on the final document this weekend. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Ed, the drafting committee is writing the final document. I know that you have seen the broad outlines. In March, 300 young people have come to Rome or came to Rome saying they want the bishops to address certain things, including social media, vocation discernment. Can you tell me whether or not, based on those broad strokes that you have seen, that this document is addressing their concerns?
Yes, it is, Lauren. I mean, we've seen an outline of the document. We haven't seen it ourselves, but it seems to cover all of those issues: formation, the impact of the digital world on young people, and how to handle that, the good things and the bad things about that. There's also the issue of accompaniment and issue of formation, and also issues to do with really just helping young people to be better integrated into the church, to welcome them. Those all seem to be there, but we don't really know exactly what's in there until Saturday. But I think that certainly by the reception of the people I've spoken to, they seem to be very happy with it, and they feel that all their concerns and interests have been included in this draft document.
So the youth delegates who were here this time don't have access to the document. Tell me what they're saying, though, about the process and their experience.
Yeah, they've all been very happy about the experience. They've really treasured it and seen it as a great privilege. They like the international aspect, the camaraderie in the hall and the meeting the bishops, and also the fact that they were able to contribute, and they were quite welcomed in their contributions. They were allowed to speak in the Synod Hall in the small groups, and they really appreciated that, and the Synod Fathers too. And they felt, the Synod Fathers, that it gave a great sense of energy and life to this synod, which they hadn't seen in previous ones.
Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thanks for your insights, Ed.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, our Catholic in America series, how the mainstream media is covering the Catholic Church. Our exclusive Catholic in America series continues with a look at how the mainstream media has covered the Catholic Church this summer and fall leading into the midterm elections. U.S. media coverage shows the hierarchy took a blow to the heart this summer. Negative coverage spiked in August after the release of a Pennsylvania grand jury report showing the abuse of more than 1,000 people by 300 Catholic priests over 7 decades. And it rose when a former Vatican diplomat released the first of 3 letters alleging a cover-up by Pope Francis. Joining me now for more analysis is Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. Thank you so much and welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Pleasure to be on the show.
I want to play 4 sound bites for you from television coverage by mainstream media as the clergy sex abuse unfolded. Take a listen.
He will convene a global meeting of bishops next February to discuss the crisis. I keep wondering, why wait until February? Are those bishops walking there?
That report, more than 1,000 victims, just sickening.
It's more than disturbing, and it's more than despicable, and it's more than just a diocesan problem or a priest problem, whatever. It's an institutional church problem.
Despite all this evidence, a spokesman for World maintains that he acted promptly in this case and removed Zerwas. if there were allegations, we dealt with them immediately.
Immediately? Really?
Now, Robbie, the importance of the sex abuse crisis is undisputed, but did the media go too far?
Well, you don't need me to tell you that the mainstream media is overwhelmingly liberal and secular, and as such, they don't wish the church well. The mainstream media has, over many, many decades now, cast the church in a negative light whenever it possibly could. And in large part, that's because people in the media, not all, but a great many, because it is overwhelmingly secular and liberal, object violently to the church's moral teachings, especially teachings about sexuality and marriage and the sanctity of human life. But having said all that, there's no question that the leadership of the church, many bishops, alas, far, far, far too many priests, brought this on themselves. It was the bad behavior of priests, abusers, of bishops who did handle these issues extremely poorly, that virtually invited their media critics to have a field day, and the media did have a field day. But look, I'll tell you something, as a faithful Catholic, someone tries to be a faithful Catholic myself, I want the truth to come out.
And
I want
so
the
do
truth
I.
to come out about the abuse. I want the
Absolutely.
truth to come out about cover-ups. If there are networks, I want that to come out. And so even if the media is ill-motivated, I think we should thank God that they're bringing out the truth.
Even this week, months later, the Washington Post and the New York Times are doing stories about Catholics struggling to reconcile the crisis with their faith. In the Sunday Post, Washington Post, a Georgetown student says, "I still do feel a level of disgust and betrayal by the Catholic hierarchy." In the New York Times this week, a story called "Why They Stay, Why They Can't." New York Catholics wrestle with their faith over abuse allegations. And one man said in that, "I fully understand why people walk away from the church." Robbie, is the media coverage creating an echo chamber?
Well, the media is an echo chamber. The media is a bubble. Again, it's overwhelmingly liberal and secular, and most people in the media spend most of their time talking to other people in the media and other people in the elite sector of the culture who see things basically the way they do. I lead most of my life day to day in a university, and it's a very similar sort of situation, overwhelmingly secular and liberal. It becomes a bubble, it becomes an echo chamber. Most people spend their time talking with people with whom they basically agree, and rarely have their views and the presuppositions of their views, their fundamental assumptions challenged. And that's not good for the media, and I wish that that would be reformed. I'm a critic of the media, just as I'm a critic of the educational establishment and of the progressivism and secularism of the mainstream culture generally. But again, having said all that,
You're
I'm
still
happy
upset
for the criticism to the extent that it brings the truth out. Yeah, I think that's right. Now, anyone who understands his faith as a Catholic or her faith as a Catholic understands that we have no guarantee that the leadership of the church, that our priests, that our bishops, or even a pope is going to be a person of good character. We have had bad popes in our history. We've certainly had many bad bishops, many, many bad priests. There are undoubtedly people who wear collars, even in the hierarchy, who don't believe what the Catholic Church teaches. I suspect there's some that have basically lost their faith. And yet, Jesus tells us he will be with his church always. Our faith is in Jesus. Our faith is not in any particular human being, any particular priest or bishop or even pope. Our faith is in Jesus. When I say that, sometimes people say, well, you're sounding like a Protestant. Well, no, this is a point on which Catholics and Protestants agree. Our faith is in Jesus. Our trust is in Jesus. Jesus is both the object and subject of our faith. He will never let us down. There will be priests who let us down. We laity will let each other down. There will be bishops who let us down, popes who let us down, but not Jesus.
Well, Pope Francis has, for the most part, stayed out of the spotlight on this subject. Let's listen in on this crucial moment that happened on the plane from the World Meeting of Families in Ireland.
E fate voi il vostro giudizio.
And for those of you who don't speak Italian, he said, quote, "I will not say a single word on this." And his advisors came out much later with promises of action by the Vatican, including a promise to review all of the documents that might relate to the Theodore McCarrick scandal. Is the Pope's absence of the media narrative leaving a vacuum? And then I'm being told we don't have much time and we're going to have to go after that.
Well, if the Holy Father asked for my advice, which he definitely has not, but if he asked for my advice, I would say, Your Holiness, here you're making a mistake. You shouldn't be silent. What you should be doing is ordering a full and thorough and independent investigation of, among other things, who knew what when in the case of Theodore McCarrick and his abuse of seminarians and others over many, many years. McCarrick rose to a very high position, an influential position in the church. He became a cardinal. He became extremely influential with other members of the hierarchy, despite a long-standing record of abuse that had been reported up the chain many times. That needs to be investigated. The Pope doesn't need to be silent about that. He needs to be saying, we need an investigation and we need the documents to be turned over to the investigators, and a full accounting eventually needs to be given to the faithful.
Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University, thank you, as always, for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Up next, Pope Francis tells us his definition of a true friend, and why a new video game about Catholic saints might be a feast for young people.
Non si può amare solo finché conviene.
Pope Francis tells the faithful you can't love only when it's convenient. At his weekly talk at the Vatican, the Holy Father says a true friend is present even during bad times and loves others without conditions. A pro-life activist shares her message about the global importance of protecting the unborn. The founder of Culture of Life Africa, Obianuju Ekosha, told an audience at the Jesuit Georgetown University that too often aid from Western nations is given to African nations for population control in an attempt to push African nations into accepting the culture of abortion. And she encouraged the audience, as American taxpayers, to insist the U.S. not fund abortion organizations at home or abroad. And she is here. The founder and president of the Culture of Life of Africa joins me now. Thank you so much, Uju, for coming on the program again.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me again.
Your new documentary is called Strings Attached. Yes. It comes out in January. Millions of dollars from Western nations are earmarked, you say, for sexual and reproductive health. From the African perspective, what did you discover? What is this money being used for once it reaches the continent?
Precisely. So, Lauren, people are paying their taxes here in the United States or other parts of the developed world, and the money goes all the way to Africa. Now, when it gets there, gets to villages, it's given to Western organizations who are so-called sexual and reproductive health and rights organizations like International Planned Parenthood Federation and Marie Stopes International, which is an abortion organization from the UK. Then they go to these villages and they destroy women's lives. So they are doing abortions and they are giving contraceptions to women and not even telling them about side effects. It's not with full informed consent. We see all kinds of horrific things, and that is what I tried to capture in this documentary, Strings Attached.
How would you like Western aid to be used instead?
Well, it shouldn't be, there shouldn't be a distraction from the real problems of, being experienced in different African countries, like education, like real healthcare, food, water, basic human needs, security. These are some of the things that, that the funds can go to, that the Africans will rejoice with. Yeah.
We had Cardinal Napier on yesterday, and he told us that from an African perspective, one of the things that is very important is that this Synod of Youth document address not just extended family, but family, and that families are so important. They are everyone, grandparents, aunts, uncles. There is no extended family. So my question to you is, what can be done with that in mind as it relates to the family and this document on the Synod of Youth?
Right. The family, especially in a place like Africa, the developing world, is where you find out that the family is a real central institution within society. That's where people get their first education. That's where they learn about faith. That's where they get their first healthcare. Family is the central core. So we should concentrate to strengthen the families, to strengthen marriages, to help mothers and fathers be able to take care of their children, to be able to educate their children. The church should look at strengthening the family and using very strong language that also emphasizes that the family should be right at the center, because I think that's God's own design. It's family.
Obianuju Ekosha, thank you so much for joining us, founder and president of Culture of Life Africa.
Thank you very much.
And finally tonight, proof that not every video game leads to trouble. Sigue a Jesus. Okay, Follow JC is a new Catholic-themed video game. It's based on Pokemon Go, where players try to catch saints or Bible characters. It was released this week in preparation for the 2019 World Youth Day in Panama. Later versions will be in English and Italian. And for a family of Pokemon Go people, this may be addicting. Just warning you. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.